They smiled when they opened the door, said they were my real family after 16 years in an orphanage. But that night, I stood outside their bedroom and heard my name in a conversation no child should ever hear. Stick with me. This story will shatter what you think family means. My name is Alex. I wasn't born into a family. I was delivered into silence. A rainstorm howled through the city the night I was found. Barely a day old, wrapped in a soggy cotton blanket and placed inside a wicker basket left on the cold stone steps of Pinebrook Orphanage. No birth certificate. No name.
No explanation.
Just me, a faded silver locket around my neck, and the storm. They logged me in as infant number 47 in the intake book. The nurses were kind but clinical. They fed me, weighed me, documented my vitals, then moved on. In a place like Pinebrook, stories like mine weren't rare. They were routine. I grew up in that building. It was an old brick structure with flickering hallway lights and a playground where the swings always creaked too loud. Some kids stayed a few months, others a few years. They came and went, always hoping their name would be called when a new couple walked through the gate. Mine never was. I watched year after year as children younger, cuter, more outgoing than me got placed into homes. Some warm, some temporary, some worse than staying. But at least they got a shot. I stayed. I wasn't rebellious or difficult. I was simply quiet. Too quiet to be noticed, too reserved to be chosen. By the time I turned 8, I stopped checking the window every time a car pulled up. By 10, I stopped asking questions. I learned to fix broken things, the kitchen toaster, the old radio in the director's office, the bent frame of a bunk bed. I taught myself through books left behind by older kids. It became easier to pour my heart into wires and screws than to ask why no one ever came for me. Still, some nights, the loneliness crept in like cold air through the window panes. Birthdays were the worst. The other kids got cupcakes and applause. I got a nod. Maybe a happy birthday scribbled on a whiteboard. I would smile anyway. Smile, because that's what you do when you're invisible but still alive. Then Grace came along. She was 16 when I was 10. Not staff, not a social worker, just another orphan, older, sharper, tired in the eyes. But unlike the others who'd aged out and grown bitter, Grace stayed kind. She became something rare, a constant. To the younger kids, she was a protector. But with me, she was more. A mentor, a friend, a sister. She showed me how to read subway maps, how to patch the hole in your jeans without thread, how to speak up when someone tried to silence you. Once, when I caught a cold and refused to go to the clinic, she snuck in herbal tea and sat beside my bed the whole night, reading aloud from an old paperback novel. She said the world didn't always need heroes. It needed people who stayed when others left. One winter, my only jacket went missing. Grace gave me hers.
No hesitation.
It didn't even fit me right. But she said, real family doesn't wait for perfection. They show up with what they have. She made me believe I mattered, even when I didn't believe it myself. When Grace turned 18, she had to leave Pinebrook. I remember the day like it was burned into the backs of my eyelids. She knelt in front of me, brushed the hair from my face and said, Alex, people will promise you a lot of things in this world. Most of them won't mean it, but I do. If you ever need me, call. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. I'll come back for you. Promise. Then she was gone. Just like that. The silence that followed felt louder than anything I'd ever known. But I didn't cry. Couldn't. Grace had believed in me, so I had to hold on to that. I still kept the silver locket. I didn't know who had left it with me or why, but I wore it like armor. Every time I touched it, I remembered. I existed. I had survived. And in a place like Pinebrook, survival was its own kind of defiance. Pinebrook was never cruel, but it was never kind either. It was structured, predictable, a place where routines replaced affection, and efficiency took the place of love. The staff rotated every few years. Volunteers came and went, their smiles warm but temporary, like sunshine behind fast-moving clouds. For those of us who stayed, time moved differently. You counted your days not by seasons or holidays, but by departures. Each suitcase rolling down the hallway was another reminder that someone had been chosen. Just not you. I remember watching a girl named Lila being adopted when I was 11. She was small, bright-eyed, and could recite the alphabet backward to impress visitors. The couple that picked her up had matching sweaters and a golden retriever waiting in their car. As they drove away, I sat on the steps, chewing my lip until it bled, wondering if I had ever been that easy to love. By then, I had learned how to disappear in plain sight. I became the one who fixed broken light switches, who changed the batteries in smoke detectors before they chirped. I was useful, and usefulness in Pinebrook was currency. But usefulness doesn't hug you goodnight. It doesn't ask if you're okay when you sit too long by the window. Every night, I'd lie in bed and wonder who my parents were. What kind of people leave a child with nothing but a locket and silence? I told myself they must have had a reason, some noble sacrifice, some secret pain. I wanted to believe that, because the alternative, that I had simply been unwanted, was too sharp to touch. Books became my escape. I read everything I could get my hands on, novels, manuals, even encyclopedias. There was a dusty world atlas I carried like a Bible. I would trace my finger along the coastlines of places I couldn't pronounce and imagine myself there, under a different name, with a family that called me theirs. One day, a new boy named Theo arrived. He was younger, louder, and constantly asked questions. One afternoon, I found him crying in the hallway. He missed his mom. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat next to him and handed him my half-eaten apple. He didn't stop crying, but he leaned against me. That was the first time I realized comfort didn't always require answers. I began doing that more, being the quiet space others could lean into. I still didn't speak much, but I listened. People started to trust me with their secrets, their fears, their dreams. Somehow, that filled a little of the emptiness inside me. Still, I never stopped thinking about Grace. She had become a kind of ghost in my mind, not one that haunted, but one that stayed. Her words echoed in moments when I felt weakest. If you ever need me, call. But I never did. I didn't know where she was. I wasn't even sure if she remembered me. And yet, I carried her belief in me like a second heartbeat. She had seen something in me once, something worth saving. Maybe that was enough to keep going. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. A couple came to visit, mid-30s, bright eyes, nervous smiles. Everyone cleaned up extra that day. The younger kids rehearsed their manners. Staff handed out fresh t-shirts to those with holes in theirs. I had long since stopped trying, but for some reason that day, I combed my hair and stood a little straighter. They asked to meet a few of us. I was called in. We sat in the common room, and they asked me what I liked to do. I said I fixed things. The woman smiled politely. The man nodded. That's useful, he said. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a spark. Maybe a sign. But when they left, they didn't take anyone. Just said they needed to think. And a week later, we found out they'd adopted a baby from a private agency instead. They wanted a clean start, a staff member whispered. I wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of hoping in secret. That night, I stayed awake long after lights out, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of the boys in the bunks beside me. And I whispered into the darkness, as if Grace could somehow hear, I'm still here, I'm still trying. And maybe that's what mattered. Because despite everything, I never let the world turn me bitter. I didn't know if family would ever come for me. But I knew this. If I ever had the chance to choose someone the way no one had chosen me, I would say yes. Without hesitation. Because no one should have to grow up feeling invisible. And no one should have to earn the right to be loved. I didn't expect anything on my 16th birthday. At Pinebrook, birthdays were more silence than celebration. Maybe you got a second helping of mashed potatoes. Maybe someone remembered to scribble "Happy Birthday" on the dry erase board in the hallway. But mostly it was just another day to endure. That morning started like any other. I fixed a broken drawer in the common room, helped a younger kid find his missing shoe, and spent lunch with a book propped open beside my tray. I wasn't hoping for anything. And then, everything changed. Around 2 p.m., the director called me into her office. Her expression was cautious, like she wasn't sure if she was about to give me good news or break my heart. Sitting across from her were two strangers, polished, composed, too carefully dressed for this place. A man with salt and pepper hair in a tailored overcoat. A woman with a sharp jawline, red lipstick, and posture so perfect it looked painful. "Alex," the director said, "these are your biological parents." The words fell like stones into the room. I blinked. Biological parents. They sounded fictional.
Impossible.
Yet they were sitting right there. The man stood up first. "Alex," he said, extending a hand. "I'm David. This is Eleanor. We've been searching for you." They said it had been a mistake. That years ago, they'd been forced by family pressures to give me up. That they never stopped thinking of me. That they'd recently hired someone to track me down. They even had my old locket with them, displayed like a talisman of sincerity. They talked about righting wrongs, making up for lost time, building a future, and they had proof. DNA test results, legal documents,
Accordo affidavit.
all legitimate, all clean. The director confirmed it with a reluctant nod. There was nothing to argue. These people, David and Eleanor, were my parents. I didn't feel joy or anger. What I felt was static, like a TV tuned to a dead channel. I'd spent so long imagining what this moment might be like. I hadn't considered how empty it might actually feel. They asked if I wanted to come home. Their home. I didn't say yes immediately, but eventually I nodded. Word spread fast in Pinebrook. Some kids gave me high fives. Others avoided eye contact. I packed everything I owned into a single backpack. 2 shirts, 3 books, a spare pair of shoes, and the locket. The one constant in my life. I wished I could call Grace, tell her what was happening. But I hadn't heard from her in years. I didn't even know where she was. And even if I did, what would I say? "Hey, turns out my parents exist after all." We drove away in a black SUV with heated seats and classical music playing softly from the stereo. David told me about the neighborhood, the nearby private school they had in mind, the room they had prepared for me. Eleanor mostly stared out the window. The house was everything they'd promised. Modern, minimalist, immaculate. There was a fountain in the front yard. My room had a smart TV, a new laptop, shelves already filled with books. Felt staged, like a hotel room someone had researched down to the brand of toothpaste. That first night, I lay awake for hours, watching the shadows stretch and shift across the walls. The sheets were too clean, the mattress too soft, the silence too precise. I felt like I was sleeping in a museum, on display, but untouchable. The next morning, Eleanor made breakfast. Perfect omelets, toast with imported jam, orange juice in tall glasses. Everything crisp and clean and correct. I said thank you out of habit. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. David asked how I'd slept. I said fine, because that's what people say when they're not ready to tell the truth. Later that afternoon, they gave me a tour of the neighborhood. Wide sidewalks, trimmed hedges, cars that all looked the same. We passed a family playing catch in their front yard, laughter echoing off the driveways. No one waved. That evening at dinner, they talked about schedules, doctors, upcoming summer camps. I nodded, responded when needed, but I couldn't help but feel like I was in a job interview I never applied for. No one asked me what I liked. No one asked how I felt. That night, I sat by my window and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear here, sharper than I'd ever seen it at Pinebrook. But it didn't make me feel closer to anything, just exposed. I reached into my pocket and held the locket. It was warm, solid.
Mine.
And I remembered something Grace had said once, long ago, when I was scared to speak in front of others. The world doesn't have to know who you are yet, Alex. But you do. So I sat there, breathing slowly, watching the night, and made a quiet promise to myself. I would try. I would give this a chance. But I would also remember how easily beautiful things can become cages. Because sometimes the people who find you aren't the ones who truly see you. For the first few weeks, everything looked perfect, at least on the outside. David and Eleanor introduced me to their neighbors as their miracle reunion. The same story rolled off their tongues at every backyard barbecue and community event. A family torn apart by unfortunate circumstances, now whole again. People nodded, clapped them on the back, offered casseroles. They believed it. Why wouldn't they? Inside the house, life operated with sterile precision. Meals arrived at exact times. Chores didn't exist. Someone else handled them. The floors shone like museum glass. The air always smelled faintly of lemon and silence. My room had new furniture, perfectly folded sheets, and a bookshelf stocked with hand-picked titles, none of which I had asked for. Every item was intentional. Nothing was mine. They gave me everything except curiosity. Not once did either of them ask about Pinebrook. Not once did they say, "Tell us what you've been through." My life, it seemed, only began the moment I stepped into their car. First, I tried to be grateful. I said thank you. I did what I was told. But a dull hum of wrongness followed me everywhere, like white noise under the surface. Sometimes I caught Eleanor watching me, not with tenderness, but with scrutiny, like she was waiting for a malfunction. David was warmer, at least in tone. He complimented my posture, my reading speed, my ability to blend in. But never once did he ask, "Are you happy?" The longer I stayed, the more the house began to feel less like a home and more like a stage set. Their conversations were rehearsed. Their smiles delayed by half a second. The air felt too still, like they were always listening. And then came the medical appointments. 5 in 1 month. Just standard, Eleanor said cheerfully, as if regular full-body scans and psychological assessments were a rite of passage. Always at private clinics. Always with Eleanor waiting just outside the room. I never got to see the results. When I asked, she smiled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're just being thorough. We lost you once. We're not taking chances." Her words were meant to comfort, but they chilled me. One night, I began keeping notes. Not diary entries, notes. Times, locations, names of doctors, things they said and didn't say. It started out of instinct. Later, it became survival. I noticed other things, too. Life insurance mail left on the counter, always swept away quickly when I walked in. The drawer in David's office that he locked every night. Their sudden quiet when I entered a room. And then there was that night. Couldn't sleep. Again. The silence in the house pressed on me like a weighted blanket. I wandered downstairs for water and heard voices. David and Eleanor. In the living room. Their tone was low, urgent. "The policy doesn't activate for another 3 weeks, Eleanor said. "We just need to keep things normal until then," David replied. "No incidents. 3 weeks isn't going to kill us," she said, her voice clipped. "But it might kill him." Silence. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. My mouth went dry. Kill him. They were talking about me. I backed up, barely remembering how I got to my room. That night, I sat on my bed, knees pulled to my chest. The silver locket clutched so tight in my hand it left an imprint. The house no longer felt like a cage. Felt like a trap. I tried to make sense of it. The testing, the secrecy, the policy. Everything clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to finish. They hadn't taken me back out of guilt or love. They had taken me back for a payout. And the countdown had begun. From that moment on, I acted. I stopped drinking anything I hadn't poured myself. I kept my phone hidden, fully charged, under my mattress. I locked my door. I watched them like they had watched me. Then I remembered Grace. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but her voice lived somewhere deep in my memory, beneath the trauma, beneath the orphanhood. She had once promised, "If anything ever feels wrong, call me, no matter what." That night, I dialed the number I had memorized long ago, not expecting her to answer. But she did. "Alex?" she said softly. I opened my mouth and nothing came out at first. Just breath. Just fear. Then finally, I whispered, "I think they're going to hurt me." She didn't ask for proof. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Where are you?" "I'm coming." Grace didn't wait. By the time the sun rose, she had already driven 4 hours from her precinct to the quiet suburb where David and Eleanor lived. She wasn't in uniform, but she carried authority like a second skin. I met her a block away from the house, just in case someone was watching. We sat in her parked car. I told her everything. The tests, the locked drawer, the shredded insurance forms, the late-night conversation I overheard. She didn't flinch, but her knuckles turned white around the steering wheel. "They're building a paper trail," she said finally. "They want you to look fragile. Sick. So when something happens, when you slip or have an accident, the story checks out." My throat was dry. They're planning it down to the hour. The policy, the trigger date, even how it's going to look. Grace reached into her bag and handed me a small black device. Voice-activated recorder. It only captures when it hears sound. Keep it on you. Let them talk. Don't confront them yet. She handed me a second phone too. Burner. Use it to text me. Never on Wi-Fi. Keep it off when you're home unless something happens. That moment in the car felt like lighting a match in the dark. For the first time since entering that house, I felt like someone was on my side. Someone who believed me. I returned home later that morning. The sun was up, and the streets were peaceful, as if nothing in the world could be wrong. I smiled at Eleanor when she greeted me in the kitchen. "You were out early," she said. "Walk to the park," I replied. "Needed air." She nodded, handed me a vitamin supplement, and turned back to her tea. I flushed the pill down the sink the moment she looked away. That afternoon, I clipped the recorder to the inside pocket of my hoodie and let it run. Every word mattered now. Over the next 7 days, I became an actor in my own life. I laughed at the right moments. I ate what they served, though I never finished a glass they poured. I asked questions I already knew the answers to, just to hear how they'd lie. The recorder caught everything. Eleanor on the phone. "Yes, the medical profile looks consistent. Nothing to flag. We're almost there. Just over a week left." David in the study. "When it happens, we stick to the story. The brakes, the rain, the curve on Hollow Creek. He was never strong anyway." Every night, I backed up the audio to Grace's burner phone in coded files. Every morning, she checked in with one message. "Are you safe?" My replies were short. "Yes, for now." They're rehearsing the lie. They're planning the drive. But I made one mistake. I forgot to close the zipper on my backpack one night. The recorder was visible just enough. David must have seen it. I knew something was wrong when I came downstairs the next morning. They were waiting. Breakfast was already on the table. Toast, eggs, my favorite tea. "You're up early," Eleanor said, her smile too wide. "Thought we could all sit together today," David added. "It's been a while since we had a proper family breakfast." I sat, heart pounding. I forced a bite of toast into my mouth and smiled. That evening, they announced a weekend trip. "Just the 3 of us," David said. "Upstate, a bit of bonding time before school starts." Something in his voice made my skin crawl. That night, dinner was even more elaborate. Salmon, asparagus, a chocolate mousse dessert in glass cups. My favorite herbal tea was already steeping when I sat down. "We've been thinking a lot about the future," Eleanor said, folding her napkin with surgical precision. "How to give you the life you deserve." David raised his glass. "To new beginnings." I clinked my cup against theirs. By the time dessert came, my hands felt heavy. My vision blurred. The room swam slightly, like it was underwater. I could feel myself slipping. Slowly, silently. I excused myself. Barely made it up the stairs. Collapsed on the floor of my bedroom. The world tilting sideways. My legs wouldn't move. My lips tingled. My heart pounded like a trapped bird. And then nothing. Only darkness. Grace hadn't heard from me in over 24 hours. That wasn't like me. Even when I was afraid, even when I said very little, I always replied. A single emoji, a period, even just the word, still. It was our system. It meant I'm alive. But this time, nothing. 3 messages sent. 3 red receipts, then silence. She knew something was wrong. She drove through the night, across county lines, for hours without stopping. She wasn't in uniform, just jeans, boots, and the jacket she always wore when things got serious. The one with a flashlight in the inside pocket and a badge tucked into the lining. She parked down the street. The house looked quiet. Too quiet. Curtains drawn even though the sun was rising. No lights on. No sound. She got out, rang the bell. Eleanor answered. "Can I help you?" Eleanor asked, smile too wide, eyes too steady. "I'm here to see Alex," Grace said evenly. "We had plans." Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "He's been feeling under the weather. Probably the flu. We're letting him rest." Grace's gaze narrowed slightly. "Still, I'd like to speak to him." David appeared behind his wife like a shadow. "It's really not a good time." Grace didn't push. She nodded, thanked them, and walked back to her car. But she didn't leave. She waited, watched. 37 minutes later, David exited the house with a duffel bag and a mechanical focus to his step. Not groceries, not errands. He wasn't coming back for a while. Grace felt it in her spine. She drove once around the block, returned on foot, slipped through the side yard like a whisper. The back door was locked. The basement window wasn't. She crawled through. The air was colder down there, thick and stale like the room had been sealed for days. Dust clung to the shelves. The kind of silence that vibrates. She turned on her flashlight and stepped carefully, listening. Then, barely audible, she heard it. A sound. Not a word, but a breath. A whisper. A weak thump. She followed it to a door bolted from the outside. "Alex?" she said. Nothing. She kicked the door once, twice, splintered the latch. Inside, I was slumped against the wall, wrists bound, eyes half-lidded, breathing shallow. My lips were dry, my face pale. She rushed forward, kneeling beside me. "It's Grace," she whispered. "I've got you. You're okay. I've got you." I wanted to speak, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my limbs numb. The drug they gave me still moved through me like syrup in my veins. She unbound my wrists. My skin was raw underneath the tape. She checked my pulse. Weak, but there. "We're leaving," she said, lifting me slowly, wrapping one arm around her neck, half carrying, half dragging me toward the stairs. As she reached the top, she dialed. "Officer down. Civilian poisoned. Request immediate backup. 321 Ivy Lane. Basement access, rear." The dispatcher tried to ask more, but she hung up. She didn't have time. In the kitchen, Eleanor stood frozen, holding a coffee mug like it was a weapon or a shield. Her face drained of color. Her voice was a whisper. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Grace said, voice like steel. "You were going to kill him. For money. For insurance." Eleanor's hand trembled. "We weren't. We didn't. Save it for the judge." And then David walked in through the front door. He froze when he saw Grace holding me up. Our eyes locked. His face didn't twist in guilt. It didn't crumple in shame. He looked annoyed, like someone whose plan had been disrupted. "You don't know what you're doing," he said to Grace. "You don't know the full story." She stood taller. "Don't need to. I know enough. You staged everything. You built a lie so airtight you thought no one would question it." He didn't answer. The sirens pierced the quiet like judgment. Blue and red lights danced across the kitchen walls. 2 police cars. 1 ambulance. Voices calling names. Orders shouted. Grace didn't let go of me until she handed me to the EMTs. "Vitals are low," she said. "Possible sedatives. Dehydration. He's been down there for at least 36 hours. As they wheeled me out, I looked back. Eleanor was in handcuffs, tears streaking her makeup. David stood silent, his face a mask. I don't remember the ambulance ride. I drifted in and out. Oxygen mask. For questions. Bright lights. But I remember Grace beside me in the hospital, sitting in the chair by the bed, hand gripping mine. "I told you," she said softly, when I finally opened my eyes. "If you ever needed me, I'd come." The hospital became more than a place for healing. It became a threshold between my old life and something else I hadn't yet named. I stayed there for 5 days, recovering under soft lights, surrounded by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the quiet beep of heart monitors. Grace never left my side. She slept in a chair, read books aloud when the silence became too loud. She didn't ask me to speak until I was ready. When I finally did, I told her everything, no edits, no holding back. I gave her the names of the doctors, the addresses of the clinics, the calendar with insurance dates, the overheard phone calls. She took it all, typed it up, and delivered it straight to the investigators. It didn't take long to unravel David and Eleanor's illusion. Their personal devices were seized. Their emails, browser history, text messages, all of it read like a blueprint for murder. Search terms like, how much is a minor worth on a life insurance policy? Untraceable sedatives. Can you fake parental DNA? Bank transfers showed movement of large sums to offshore accounts. Private emails between Eleanor and a shadowy medical consultant revealed attempts to alter health records. The police found insurance paperwork post-dated to match the adoption. The web was complete. Their trial was scheduled within weeks. The community recoiled. Neighbors who once toasted to the miracle reunion now stared at the courtroom with widened eyes. Reporters waited outside the courthouse. My face was kept anonymous, but my story, my near-death, was everywhere. But what no one expected was what came next. One afternoon, Grace slid a manila envelope across the hospital table. "I need you to see something," she said gently. Inside were pages from a private investigation report. Grace had commissioned it in secret, even before I vanished. The DNA test David and Eleanor showed the orphanage years ago? It was fabricated. In reality, our DNA was a partial match, too low for parentage. "They're not your biological parents, Alex," she said. I stared at the paper. "But the court, the documents, they forged them. And years ago, your real mother was tricked. They convinced her she was signing temporary guardianship during a mental health crisis. She never agreed to give you away." I swallowed hard. "Where is she now?" Grace opened another folder. A photograph slid out. A woman in blue scrubs, standing outside a rural clinic. Her face aged, but unmistakably familiar. "She's alive," Grace said softly. "Her name is Rachel. She's a nurse in a town 2 states away. She's been trying to find you ever since they cut her off." I stared at the photo like it might fade if I blinked. Something in my chest cracked. Not in pain, but in recognition. She had my eyes, my posture, my name. The realization hit me like light pouring through stained glass. I wasn't abandoned. I was stolen, and now I was being returned. But first, there was the matter of justice. The courtroom was cold and clinical. David and Eleanor sat at the defense table in tailored clothes, but nothing could hide the tremble in their hands. Their lawyer tried to claim the entire plan had been misinterpreted, a tragic misunderstanding, but the evidence told another story. The prosecutor played audio from the hidden recordings. "The policy activates in 3 weeks. He just needs to stay alive until then. The brakes, the rain. No one will question a freak accident." The entire room fell into silence. Then came the financial trail, the fake documents, the offshore accounts, the sedatives found in my system, the video Grace recorded from the basement. Me, tied to a chair, too weak to move. Their attorney dropped his pen. There was nothing left to defend. And then Rachel entered the courtroom. She sat at the back, quiet, clutching a tissue in both hands. When our eyes met, the room dissolved. I didn't see the cameras. I didn't see the jury. I saw the woman who had never stopped being my mother, even when the world told her she didn't deserve the title. I wept, and she nodded slowly, like she had waited 16 years to be seen. In the end, the verdict came fast. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, fraud, kidnapping. David and Eleanor were sentenced to decades behind bars with no chance of parole. But the real victory wasn't in the punishment. It was in the reunion. That night, in the hallway outside the courtroom, Rachel approached me. She didn't rush. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I've been dreaming of this moment for so long. I'm sorry for everything they took from us." I stepped forward, and for the first time in my life, I felt the warmth of my mother's arms around me. And I let myself believe, for the first time, that I was finally truly home. Before the trial concluded, before the courtroom saw David and Eleanor for who they truly were, something else happened. Something that reminded me this story wasn't over just because the gavel was ready to fall. It was 2 days after Grace rescued me from their house. I was lying in the hospital bed, the 4 in my arm, a constant reminder that survival wasn't just about escape. It was about recovery. Grace had gone downstairs to get coffee. When she returned, her face had changed. Her eyes were sharper, her jaw tight. She sat beside me and placed a sealed folder on my lap. "There was a break-in at my apartment," she said quietly. "Nothing stolen, except for my laptop and the flash drive with all the raw audio files." She didn't have to say it. We both knew what that meant. They weren't trying to take valuables. They were trying to erase the truth. I felt it again, that cold, metallic fear creeping down my spine. Even from behind bars, they had reach. Or maybe it wasn't them anymore. Maybe someone else had taken the wheel. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. The way David had smiled during the last dinner. Eleanor's calm voice. The sound of the teacup clinking gently on porcelain. The click of a door locking behind me. Grace didn't sleep either. She paced the hospital room like a soldier, phone in one hand, her badge tucked into the other. The next morning, David and Eleanor were arrested. News crews gathered. Headlines formed. But just because 2 people were caught didn't mean the danger had passed. From the hospital window, I began to notice a car, parked across the street. Same spot, same dark tint. The first day, I thought it was nothing. The second, I got suspicious. The third, I told Grace. She ran the plates. There were none. "They're watching," she said. "Someone's still trying to silence this." The police arranged for me to be transferred to a secure location, a safe house several counties away. I was escorted by 2 officers. No one but Grace and the lead investigator knew where I was. No hospital staff, no press, no one. The safe house was small, quiet, the kind of place no one would think to look. It had cameras, a panic button, and a front door that felt like a vault. But still, I felt hunted. Some nights, I dreamed I was back in the basement. Others, I heard Eleanor's voice echoing in my sleep. 3 weeks isn't going to kill us, but it might kill him. Grace came by every day. She brought food, updates, and sometimes just silence. But on the 5th day, she arrived with something new. A manila envelope, heavier than the last. "There's more," she said. Inside was an expanded report. Phone records, financial trails, hidden emails. Turns out David and Eleanor weren't the masterminds. Not entirely. There was a third person, an insurance broker named Malcolm Reese. He wasn't just involved. He was the architect. He had ties to forged documentation firms, access to confidential medical networks, and a long history of helping wealthy clients exploit legal loopholes. He was the one who faked the adoption papers, who coached them through how to make me appear vulnerable, unstable, who crafted the plan down to the last lab result. And now he was missing, vanished the day after their arrest. "He's not just hiding," Grace said. "He's cleaning house." We weren't the only ones in danger. The investigation widened. Other families came forward. Other kids. Other cases where vulnerable teenagers had died in what seemed like accidents. Falls, overdoses, drownings. All of them connected to insurance policies. All of them signed by Reese. It became clear. This wasn't just about me. This was a system, a network. I had been the next scheduled casualty. And the only reason the chain broke was because I lived. The FBI got involved. Grace gave them everything she had. The prosecutor called me the boy who lived through a machine built to erase people. And I knew then I wasn't just a survivor. I was the start of an avalanche. In the days that followed, arrests were made across 3 states. doctors, notaries, brokers, all of them part of a web that turned children into payouts. And somehow, in the center of that web, was a kid from Pinebrook who just wanted to be seen. Me. One night at the safe house, after the agents had left and Grace had gone to sleep on the couch, I stood outside and looked up at the sky. It was clear, stars like pinholes in the black. I still didn't know what came next. I didn't know if the trial would bring justice for all. I didn't know what kind of life I'd build after this. But I knew I wasn't running anymore. And the people who thought I was disposable, they had no idea just how loud a survivor could become. By the time the trial began, I had been moved again, not for safety this time, but for healing. Grace had helped me relocate to a modest apartment just outside a small riverside town. I wasn't alone. Rachel, my mother, came with me, not as a savior, not as a stranger trying to make up for the past, but simply as someone who had waited her whole life for the chance to love me properly. Life there moved differently, slower, gentler, the kind of place where you could walk to the corner store without being recognized from the news, where people didn't look at me like a tragedy or a survivor. I was just a teenager who liked to fix broken radios and sketch maps of places I'd never been. Rachel gave me space. She never pressed for details. She let the silence do its work, filling the house with music instead of questions. On some mornings, we would sit quietly by the window, sipping tea, listening to the wind move through the trees. Other times, she told me stories of my early childhood, the parts she'd held on to, the memories they hadn't managed to erase. "I always knew you'd find your way back to me," she said one night, resting her hand gently on mine, "even when the world tried to make you disappear." Meanwhile, justice was unfolding in the background. The trial was massive, 3 defendants, over 30 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits. I didn't attend every hearing, but Grace kept me updated, sending brief messages that told me everything I needed to know. "They're squirming," she wrote once. "Jury's locked in." Prosecutor played the basement video. I watched the key moments from home. David and Eleanor sat in stiff silence as the prosecution presented their web of lies. Financial records, fabricated DNA tests, insurance policies with backdated signatures. The video of me, bound, sedated, left in darkness, was played in full. Even the courtroom fell silent. When Grace took the stand, she spoke clearly and without dramatics. She told the jury how she had known me since childhood, how she had trusted her gut when I went silent. She testified about being tricked, coerced, and misled by her own distant relatives during one of the lowest points in her life. She spoke not in anger, but in sorrow. "I didn't give up my child," she told the court. "He was taken." When the verdict finally came, I watched it from my living room couch, wrapped in a blanket my mother had knit. The judge's voice echoed through the speakers as the jury foreman read, "Guilty on all counts, David, Eleanor, and Malcolm Reese, who had been captured trying to board a private plane in Belize." The sentence was swift and unequivocal. Decades in prison with no possibility of parole. But what mattered most wasn't how long they would be behind bars. It was that the truth had been spoken, publicly, loudly, and without shame. The press called it the largest insurance fraud case involving minors in U.S. history. There were interviews, documentaries, even offers for books and films. I declined them all, because this story wasn't entertainment. It was my life. And the part one cared about most wasn't the fall of monsters. It was the quiet rebuilding of something honest. After the sentencing, the judge made a final statement. His words stayed with me more than the verdict itself. "Let the record reflect that this case is not only about crime, but about worth." This young man, Mr. Alex Hayes, was seen as a number, a liability, payout. But today we affirm that no life is disposable. That truth, when spoken with courage, can dismantle even the most careful deception. I printed those words, folded them, slipped them into my wallet, not because I needed proof, but because they reminded me who I was, and who I never had to be again. In the weeks that followed, I returned to school. Grace stayed in touch, every Friday coffee without fail. Rachel made pancakes every Sunday. Theo, my old friend from Pinebrook, even came to visit one weekend. We talked about the past, yes, but we also talked about the future, what we'd build, who we'd choose to be. One evening, I stood on the small dock behind our apartment, watching the river shimmer under a setting sun. In my hand was the silver locket I had worn since the day I was abandoned. No, since the day I was hidden. I held it up to the light, then quietly placed it in a small wooden box and closed the lid. Some symbols you carry with you forever. Others you choose to set down when you're finally free. I don't know exactly when the story stopped being about what happened to me and started becoming about who I wanted to become. Maybe it was the first time Rachel asked me to help fix a leaky pipe and didn't hover nervously while I did. Maybe it was when I laughed, really laughed, watching Theo trip over his own shoelaces at the bus stop. Or maybe it was just waking up one morning, stretching toward the sun, and realizing I wasn't afraid of what the day might bring. The trauma didn't vanish. It never does. It lingers in the background like the echo of thunder after a storm. Some days it's loud. Some days it's just a whisper. But it no longer defines the silence. It doesn't steal the morning light. Instead, it became a foundation. I started volunteering at a local youth center. First, I was just fixing things, busted lamps, rusted bike chains, jammed doors. But kids have a way of seeing through silence. They started talking to me, asking questions. Not just about tools and wires, but about life. One afternoon, a 13-year-old named Isaiah sat beside me as I repaired a speaker. "You look like someone who got out," he said. I looked up. "Got out of what?" He shrugged. "Whatever tries to keep people stuck." I smiled. "I did. And so will you." Word spread, slowly, quietly. Not just about the trial, but about me. Teachers asked if I'd speak to students. One local paper asked for an interview. I declined the spotlight, but I said yes to the classroom. I stood in front of a group of kids who didn't know me, and I told them the truth. That surviving was only the beginning. That the world might try to shrink them, erase them, sell them, but they were more than what anyone ever tried to take. After that, something shifted. I wasn't just healing, I was becoming. One day, Rachel brought me a photo album wrapped in a faded towel. I opened it and found snapshots of a life I never knew I'd lived. My baby footprints, a birthday cake with a single candle, tiny drawings I had scribbled in crayon. She'd kept them all. "I held on to these," she whispered, "because I never stopped believing I'd hold you again." I cried that night, not from grief, but from recognition. I was loved, always had been. I just hadn't known where to look. Grace visited every week. Sometimes she brought takeout. Other times, she brought silence and a bottle of lemonade. One evening, she handed me a small box filled with letters. Messages from kids, parents, even strangers who had read about the case. Some thanked me. Others shared their own stories of survival, of finding voice through someone else's courage. "You don't have to read them," Grace said. "But I thought you should know you mattered." I read every single one. And then I started writing back. Some days I still walked by the river. I liked watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the surface. It reminded me that nothing stays still, not even pain. One day I brought Isaiah with me. He walked slowly at first, quiet. Then he asked, "Do you ever wish it had never happened?" I paused, thought carefully. "No," I said at last. "I wish the people who hurt me had made different choices. I wish I hadn't been afraid for so long. But if it never happened, I might have never met Grace, or found Rachel, or known what kind of person I could become." He nodded. "That makes sense." And it did. That night, as I stood at the kitchen counter helping Rachel prepare dinner, I realized that love had snuck up on me. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, real. She let me stir the sauce even when it splashed. She let me talk or not talk. She let me be. This was family. Not the one assigned by birth, but the one built through choices, trust, and staying when things got hard. A week later, Grace gave me an old toolbox for my birthday. Inside, taped to the lid, was a note. "You were never broken, just waiting to build something better. I keep it under my bed. Sometimes I still take out the silver locket, the one I arrived with. It no longer carries weight, it carries memory. I've added an engraving on the back. Family isn't who finds you, it's who never leaves. Because I understand now. The story didn't end in a hospital bed or a courtroom or a newspaper article. It didn't end when they went to prison or when I found Rachel again. It didn't even end here. It just began the moment I realized this. You don't have to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you. You can choose to be the person you needed when no one was looking. You can choose to love loudly, to live honestly, and to leave light in the places others tried to darken. And sometimes that's how you win, not by erasing the past, but by outgrowing it.